Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Okay, and yourself?
Waiting for the rain, waiting for the rain.
Yeah, it's starting to cloud up pretty nasty here right now.
Oh, so for those of you on the east of Allegheny County, we're gonna get some rains coming your way.
We don't mind it this week. We just don't want it next week.
That's right. We're just giving folks a couple minutes here to join us. This is a fairly informal meeting today to talk about the economic impact analysis and the rural Maryland profile that we tasked Towson University and the Regional Economic Studies Institute to complete on our behalf. We'll hear from Allie Gruber. We'll be going through the report in depth. We did have a previous short presentation before the last RMC Executive Board. However, we didn't think that was quite the right place to really dig into some of the information that's contained in this report. So the purpose of today's meeting is to really go through this report, answer any questions, and really just digest the information that is contained in the report. And like I said, Ms. Gruber will conduct the presentation. And if you want to ask questions during the presentation, feel free, just utilize the raise your hand function, and we'll be trying to monitor those questions as they come in. So folks are still coming in. So let me run through our participant list here so you folks know. I think there's too many to go around and keep us on time. I did want to keep this under an hour, but we'll go as long as anybody has questions. So folks, welcome. I'm Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council. Welcome to today's session here with the Regional Economic Studies Institute to discuss the Rural Maryland Economic Impact Analysis and the Rural Maryland Profile. So also on with us today is Megan Darcy with the RMC, Amanda Clevenger, and Dakota Matthews. Also joining us, I've got Bill Valentine, AC Alray, Amanda Hind, Ashley Green, Cheryl DeBerry, Danny Thompson, Ed Goida, Jacinta Bottom Spencer, Jack Shaw, Janine Zhang. I'm sorry, apologize for that. And folks are still coming in. So Judy Carbone, Keith Johnson, Kim Durst, Leslie Hart, Lisa at Beach to Bay Waterways, Lynn Milkey, Mike Tilkey, Mindy Burgoyne, I think that's MQ Riding, Naomi Hyman, Patience Snow, Pete Lesher, Rosanna Vogt, Stefan Tabeni, Susan Harrison, Kelly Cromer. There was a Scott, just listed as Scott. If you could introduce yourself so folks know who's on.
Sure, I'm Scott Woolens. I'm a veterinarian pharmacologist running for House of Delegates for Carroll County District 5.
Right, well, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I also see a number here, a 410-310-6493. If you could just identify yourself.
Charlotte, it's Scott Warner.
Oh, hey, Scott. All right, thanks for joining us. I see Susan O'Neill has joined us, and Mel Leader has joined us. Who am I missing? If you just want to.
John Hickman.
Hey, welcome, John. I think that's all the participants. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. With us is Allie Gruber. She's the research associate with the Towson University Regional Economic Studies Institute. She's sharing her screen, and you want to take it away, Allie? Thank you.
Jim Bruce is on too.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for that introduction, Charlotte. So my name's Allie. I'm a research associate at Towson University's Regional Economic Studies Institute. And we're working with the Rural Maryland Council to develop an economic impact analysis and also a rural Maryland profile. So this is the report. We're just going to walk through it pretty much. If anybody has any questions during this, you can use the Zoom function to raise your hand, or you can just raise your hand or ask the question, whatever works best, and I'll do my best to answer anything. So we're going to start at the executive summary of the report. So the economic impact analysis and fiscal impact analysis was conducted based on 2 grants that RMC administers, and that's the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund, RMPIF, and the Maryland Agricultural Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund, which is MAERDAF. I don't know if there's any, if you guys usually say RMPIF or MAR, so we've been saying RMPIF and MAERDAF, so I hope that that is correct. But MAERDAF focuses more on community development, regional planning, economic development, and RMPIF focuses more on improving the standard of living in rural regions. So first off, this is just kind of a high overview, as an executive summary section usually is. So this table is just the number of grants that were awarded, summed from 2018 to 2021. So it was a pretty even spread, 146 and 151, and between all of the regions. Also important to note is that there are the 6 rural regions and then 1 group called statewide, which is where we put any grants that went to multiple or all rural regions. Any grants that couldn't be allocated to just 1 rural region. So it's kind of an other category. From 2018 to 2021, RMC awarded 297 grants total. The majority of them went to the Middle Shore, but it was pretty even, around 30 to 60 or so each region received. So coming down here, this is just a high level overview of the awarded and matched amounts. For the purposes of the economic analysis, we included the secured matched funding in the direct effect for the analysis, as well as the awarded amount. In some cases, the matched amount exceeded the awarded amount. Particularly of note, there was one in 2021 in Middle Shore, which you can see here. It's a bit of an outlier. It was in Talbot County. There was a $45 million matched amount for, I believe it was road work, developing their central business district. But so you can see from 2018 to 2021, there was definitely a lot more awarded through the RMPIF grant than the MAERDAF grant. MAERDAF totaled awarded about 3.7 million, and the matched was very similar. So a total of around 7 to 8 million through MAERDAF. And RMPIF was about 16 million awarded with 64 million matched, and the majority of that coming from that one outlier secured funding. So yeah, those are those. So I'm going to go ahead and skip these for now and jump into the introduction so that we can talk about more of the methodology before diving into the results of it. So let's see, we'll just dive straight into the methodology. The really fun part, the nitty-gritty part. So what is an economic impact analysis? Basically, what we do at Resi is we use this industry standard software called InPlan, which is an input-output regional economic modeling software. It basically takes multipliers, which is another fun economic term, for certain geographic areas and applies them to economic events. So basically, I have a hypothetical example here to kind of put it in context. The direct effect, or the data that we use and we put in plan to give us our results, is the grant that is awarded to an organization from RMC. So RMC awards a certain amount of money funding to an organization. That's the direct effect. Also included in the direct effect, as I mentioned earlier, is the matched amount. And then there's an indirect effect from that, and that would be that organization spending on supplies or services or paying their employees towards the purpose of that grant. So the money kind of multiplies and moves in the economy. And then the final layer is the induced effect, which is spending by the employees of the organization or any of the suppliers. So the indirect effect would be, you know, this organization pays their employees, and the induced effect would be an employee pays their rent with that money, or they go out to dinner with that money. It's like that. So it impacts a lot of different industries and sectors, and it impacts them differently based on the region they're in. For the purposes of this study, we did model 6 or 7 different geographic areas, if you include the statewide one. So each rural region is composed of 3 counties, and so that's how we did them in InPlan. And then also the statewide grant would be a state level model. So that's the methodology for those. And then for the rural Maryland profile, we decided it would be best to kind of not just tell a story with these numbers, but to tell a story with more context by providing demographic and labor force statistics on all of the different rural regions, compare them to the urban region and also to the state as a whole, just to highlight the unique qualities, the similarities and differences between the rural Maryland and all of Maryland. All of the results are represented in 2021 dollars. So that's important to note. So we can dive into the economic and fiscal impact analysis section now, unless anybody has any questions about what we've discussed so far. Okay. All right, so we've already gone over this, how many MAERDAF and RMPIF grants RMC has awarded and their totaled award amount and matched amount. So this is the first kind of overview of everything, overall totals, not extremely detailed or granular. So this table here is for the MAERDAF grant. It's the total annual economic impact in rural Maryland for all the years. And it goes by economic impact results. So in plan, we get 3 different types of results for the economic impact. And that would be output, employment, and employee compensation. Output is like GDP, or gross domestic product, and employment is jobs that are supported from the money that is spent, and employee compensation is those jobs that are supported in the wages that they make. So from 2018 to 2021, the MAERDAF grant supported output of about 12.1 million, or supported 114 jobs, or supported 4.4 million in employee compensation. And I say or instead of and because these are not additive. It is just different ways of viewing the same impact, different terms. Oh, and as you can see, from 2018, going from 2018 to 2021, definitely there's been an increase in the awarded and matched amounts. Starting with like the total impact being around 1.1 million in 2018 and being around 5.1 million in 2021. So there's definitely a big difference, or in other terms, 11 jobs supported versus 48 jobs supported. So this is the same table, but for the RMPIF grants. As you can see, there's a lot more of an impact going on just because there was a lot more funding awarded through RMPIF. The grant sizes were larger. But you can see the same trend where in 2018, it's about 4.2 million and it steadily grew and then jumped in 2020 to 27.6 million in output. And then 2021, you do see this outlier event here because of that one matched amount that I had mentioned previously. So the 4-year total for RMPIF grants was 124.8 million in output. And that can be expressed in the other ways as well. So that's kind of just a high level overall. It's not by region or by direct, indirect, or induced, but we will get into that later. So here, this table is a bit scary to look at, but it has a lot of good information. This is in-plan's tax category breakdown. So there are main tax categories, and then there's the specific taxes that are included in them. Some of them you have probably never heard of, that I've never heard of, and some of them are really common. But this table is important because it shows all the different taxes that in-plan takes into account. Obviously, the way that taxes are levied are different county to county. So in-plan uses the current year tax information from each county to estimate where taxes are going, how much they are, what's taxed and what's not, and what level it's taxed on, county or state or federal. For this study, we focus on state and county taxes. So we did not include any of the federal tax revenue in this. But so the main tax categories are property, income, sales, payroll, and other, which is kind of a catch-all. Interesting taxes in here. But yeah, so this will come in handy when we're reviewing the tax revenue, the fiscal impact of the grants. So yeah, in-plan uses the collected and reported taxes within Maryland for the current data year to estimate fiscal impact. So it's not exact, but it is a very good estimate. And as said previously, this is not in addition to the other results that we've discussed. They cannot be added. These are actually, tax revenue is included in the output. So this is just kind of a subsection of that that we can look at. So here we have two tables for MAERDAF and RMPIF and their annual fiscal impact, broken out by year and by tax category. As you can see, sales taxes pretty much make up the bulk of the impact, along with income and property. Others is usually a very small impact. But as you can see, the tax revenues did increase each year for both of them, which follows that the amount awarded also increased year over year. And yeah, in 2021, MAERDAF, there's about 341,000 estimated state and county tax revenue. And for RMPIF, that was about 5.9 million. So now we can dive more into some of the detailed economic and fiscal impacts by direct, indirect, and induced effects and by rural region. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if when we measure when we measure the jobs created impact, are we measuring those jobs created only in the year in which that spending was done? Are we taking into account the phased in impact, the employer that says, if you help us get this started or this expanded or this particular asset, in 3 years, we'll be able to add 150 jobs, or how does that get
Yeah.
that kind of phased in impact get accounted for in these data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these aren't jobs that are being created. These are jobs that would be supported. So they are not directly associated with the actual grant. This is what IMPLAN is saying could be supported or would be supported from this direct effect. And so when we input this data into IMPLAN, we put it into different industries. So if the grant was, say, going towards supporting agricultural education in rural areas, it would be distributed differently than a grant that, say, is going to an organization that's going to support local farmers purchasing new farming equipment. So the way that money and the way that those jobs move is different. IMPLAN, we're not specifically going through each grant and, calling up people and saying, hey, like, they gave you this money, how many jobs did this support? How many paychecks did this do? So it's all pretty much, it's very high level estimations of, based on current data from these different local jurisdictions. But so in short, no, it doesn't see things moving forward and how many jobs it would support. But in a way it also does, because it, you'll see when we get down to direct, indirect, and induced, those different levels, it's kind of like it just trickles and it gets smaller as it goes. But so like directly, this amount of money could support this many jobs, but then those jobs and the people who make that money, they'll spend money and they'll support the money that they spend will support jobs. And then the money that they spend will support jobs, and so on and so forth. So it is just for the year that it's in, but it does expand well beyond just the direct jobs that are actually being supported by that grant money. I hope I answered your question well. I think I got a little off topic.
Oh, thank you. That is helpful. That's good context for the data.
Perfect. Yes, Dr. David Abrahams.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a little technical problem there.
No
To
problem.
follow up with Peter's question then, to just reclassify, do you have the ability or are you tracking the type of impact that you're having on the various types of grants that you're offering? So for example, with your farm equipment analogy, if that helps to increase the efficiency or the production process, are you capturing what the additional equipment being added, or if there was an initiative to help farmers expand their product base within Maryland, are you measuring those impacts from those grants based on the type of grant and the impact that you're expecting from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, we, don't really have the granularity of the data to contact these people and to monitor production for these different, before grant and after grant, and the efficiency and productivity. That would have to be a very specific study with just a few organizations. Resi has done work like that before. It would be a bit different than an economic impact analysis, though. That would be, I guess, more of just a quantitative analysis of a very specific organization and the work that they have done and how it has impacted their efficiency and productivity. But that would be really interesting to see and to research. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Perfect. Mr. Tubin, I hope I said your last name right.
Yes. Yeah, just a follow-up question. Those figures that you're giving, do they include the multiplier effect in the economy as well?
Yes, they do. So in a little bit, we'll go more into the tables that break it down by direct, indirect, and induced, which is where the multipliers come in the indirect and induced. But for now, this is just all of them summed together. So this does include the multiplier effect, yes. And the multipliers are different for each county. Implan has them set differently. So, you know, some counties have more concentrated employment in agriculture and forestry and fishing. And so if you have a grant that is going into that industry in that county that is, you know, has a lot of employment in that industry, you know, the multipliers are going to be higher, if that makes any sense. So each one of the rural regions is very specific to exactly what that local economy is doing and what it is in.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? All right, let's continue forward. So here we have a little bit more detailed MAERDAF economic impact summary. So it goes by year and it also goes by direct, indirect, and induced. So indirect and induced includes those multipliers that we were talking about. So it kind of just shows the flow of the money, of the jobs, of the wages through the economy. So you can see the total column, you'll recognize those numbers. It's the same as before. They're just broken out differently. So the direct effect would pretty much just be the summation of the awarded amount and the matched amount. And that would be in terms of output. And then that is then translated in terms of employment and then translated in terms of employee compensation. And then the indirect, so how those organizations that have those grants are using that money when they get it. So the first or the second transaction of money, where the first transaction is RMC giving the money. The second transaction would be that organization using that money. And then induced is the third, the fourth, the fifth, the nth transaction of where that money goes. So you can see that since there are so many more transactions happening in the induced category, the multipliers are higher. So that amount will always be larger than the indirect, because the indirect is usually, there aren't as many steps in there. So direct is first, indirect second, and then induced is so on and so forth. But so again, you can see that the impact increased as the years went on, ending in 2021 with 48 jobs supported, 5.1 million in output supported, and 1.8 million in employee compensation. So the next one is by region. So it's the same grant, MAERDAF grant, same numbers, but now it's broken down by region and year and not by direct, indirect, and induced. So these are the sum of direct, indirect, and induced for each year and each result category. So I have the table sorted so that the region with the highest impact is at the top. So Lower Shore had the largest impact with a 4-year total of 2.8 million in output, 26 jobs, and 1 million in employee compensation. And followed by that is statewide, which again is kind of a catch-all category for all of the grants that didn't go to just one region. But it was fairly even, ranging from about 600,000 to about 2.8 million from Upper Shore to Lower Shore. So yeah, and again, from 2018 to 2021, the grant amounts increased. And all of this is in 2021 dollars. So even the 2018 results are in 2021 dollars. That is one great thing about InPlan, is that when you're inputting data, you put in the data year, and then you put in the desired data result year. So when we're putting in the data that RMC provided for us, that's from 2018 in 2018 dollars. We just tell that to InPlan, and we tell them we want it in 2021 dollars in the results. So $1 is equal to $1 in all of this. So you don't have to account for any inflation or anything like that. And then this is going to be the fiscal impacts. So that fun table that we looked at earlier with all the different tax categories, this is all of them summed together. And it goes by year and by region. And as you can see, it's just another way to represent the impact. So it's the same, it's pretty much the same results we're viewing, just in different forms. So it's the same spread from lower shore to upper shore. And all of these are included in the output results. And then we'll move on to the RMPIF. It's going to follow the same structure as the last section, just a different grant. So this one's by year, direct, indirect, and induced. And you can see, particularly in 2021, where that huge matched amount was, output for the total was 85 million about. So definitely an outlier year, but you can see in 2020 where there wasn't that huge outlier, there was still a large increase, jumping from 7.5-ish million to about 28 million in total output supported, which again includes those taxes. So theoretically, in 2021, the RMPIF grants that were awarded supported could support a total of 822 jobs, which is huge, huge. So this is the same one as before, although you'll notice different ordering. For RMPIF, obviously Middle Shore had the largest impact, just with that one grant, and then followed by Southern, and then Upper Shore, and going all the way down to statewide at the bottom, which is interesting because the statewide grants were had the second largest impact from the MAERDAF grants. So there were definitely a lot more MAERDAF grants that were not directed at a particular rural region, but that were just for rural Maryland, which is interesting. And one important thing to note that I don't know if it's hard to pick up on unless you're doing math in your head here, but not all of the totals for the employment will add up to the total here. And that's because there are decimals in here that we've hidden, because 0.5 of a person isn't a thing. So we just round just to make more sense. But in theory, that 0.1 or the decimals are accounted for in, I guess, full-time, part-time, amount of hours, the multipliers, but for the sake of everyone's eyes and heads, we have taken the decimals out. But yeah, so 4-year total Middle Shore employment, about 807. So the vast majority of the jobs and the output and employee compensation came from Middle Shore, just from that 1 year in 2021. But if you look at the spread in the other years, 2018 through 2020, it is fairly spread evenly. Middle Shore and Southern are up there together. Interestingly, Upper Shore kind of had a good year in 2020. They received a good amount of funding in 2020, jumping up to about 8.8 million. But the average output, I would say, was about like 1 million for the earlier years for these different rural regions. And then the final one, which is the fiscal impacts by region, and the 4-year total. So again, it's the same results, just expressed in different terms. And you can see that it's the same order and everything. And the taxes don't change too much year to year. They just change depending on the amount of impact that is going on that year and in that region. So that wraps it up for the economic and fiscal impact analysis. Before we move on to the Maryland profile, are there any further questions?
Ally, I had one question. This is Jim Bruce. Earlier you said that certain factors were not additive.
Yes.
I take it output is direct plus indirect and induced. Are they additive?
Yes, yes. So the direct, indirect, and induced are, it's almost like a layered cake. So they're all together though. So the total of those three is the total impact. Those are additive. It's the different result categories that are not. So when we're expressing the impact in terms of output, we're expressing the same thing when we're expressing it in terms of employment and employee compensation. So yeah, so if we go up here, we wouldn't say in 2021 in Middle Shore, the grants supported 73 million output and 713 jobs and 23.5 employee compensation. It's one or the other. They're just different terms.
Thank you. That's clear.
Awesome. Are there any other questions before we move on? All righty. So let's jump into the more fun stuff, I think, away from the numbers. Well, actually, I lied. There's a lot more numbers in this section. So here is a map of the 6 rural regions. Probably should have started with this because it's very important. So you've got the Western region over here, North Central's in green, Upper Shores, light blue, Middle Shore, dark blue, Lower Shores, this purple blue, Southern is orange, and the urban region is gray. And I hope these colors are clear enough. I understand that the blues and the purples they're a bit similar. But yep. And so each of them includes 3 counties, except for the urban region, which is 5 counties plus Baltimore City, which is where I am. So we're going to start off with the rural region demographic profile, and then afterwards we'll move into a labor force analysis. So kind of starting bare bones and then building it back to connect to the economic impact analysis with the labor force data. So focusing on the demographics of rural Maryland compared to urban Maryland and compared to Maryland as a whole, looking at population, rural regions nationally tend to be less populated, more sparsely populated, and in recent years have been experiencing some decline in population. It really does depend though. A lot of rural Maryland is not just rural, it's suburban, which is increasing in population according to national trends. And that can be seen here in Maryland, where some of the rural regions are declining in population while others are increasing in population. And you can see that the urban region follows very closely with Maryland as a whole because it makes up the majority of Maryland. About 71.1% of Maryland's population lives in the urban region. And really interesting is looking at the population per square mile. I mean, looking at the map, you can see the majority of the land of Maryland is rural Maryland. But despite that, the majority of the population is highly concentrated in the center urban region. So there's that. Interestingly, Western and Middle Shore both are experiencing some population decline. And they are also the least dense, not accounting for the Lower Shore. So the next graph is going to look at population race by region. So along with their growing dense populations, urban areas in the US tend to be more racially diverse when we compare to rural areas. And that is no different in Maryland, as you can see here. Maryland is about half white alone, and the urban region is a little bit lower than the Maryland average at 39.5%. But you can see all of the rural regions have higher percentages of their population are white alone. So deviations from this are Maryland, about 30% of Maryland residents are Black or African American alone. This is lower in all of the rural regions, except for the southern region, interestingly. And the urban region is about 35%, so about 5% more Black or African American alone. And that's the majority of the population in Maryland. So keep on moving. You can see the same trend with percent population Hispanic or Latino by region. In 2020, you can see that about 11.8% of Maryland's population was Hispanic or Latino, and that's a bit higher in the urban region and a lot lower in all of the rural regions, with the highest being the Middle Shore at about 7.7%. So while the US year over year is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, the change is just a bit slower or delayed in rural areas. That's not to say it's not happening though. And then moving on from that, next one we'll look at is age distribution. So nationally, the population in the US has been getting older. However, this trend is more pronounced in suburban and rural areas. And the same can be said about Maryland. So the median age in Maryland is 38.9, and it is overall higher in the rural regions except for the southern region, and lower in the urban region. And before I move on to these other two columns, I'll explain them real quick. They're not the most common metrics used. So the old age dependency ratio expresses the population's proportion of seniors to adults. So the higher the number is, the more adults there are over the age of 65 in that population compared to those 18 to 64. So you can see the old age dependency ratio is 24 in Maryland, and it's a little bit lower in the urban region. Interestingly, it is very low in the southern region, which the southern region also has the lower median age. So basically there are more adults aged 18 to 64 compared to adults over the age of 65 in the southern region. And you can also see that the lower shore has the lower shore and middle shore have very high old age dependency ratios. So it's likely that more people are retiring there in those regions. And then the last one is the child dependency ratio, which is pretty much the same as the old age dependency ratio, except it is population under 18 compared to the population 18 to 64. So the higher it is, the more children there are to adults. So in Maryland, it's about 35.6. All of them are pretty much around 35. Interestingly, it is pretty high in the southern region again. So the southern region has a very interesting age distribution compared to the rest of the state of Maryland. There are more children and there are fewer seniors in southern region. And it's fairly low in the lower shore, which again, it seems that that follows that trend with the low old age dependency ratios, or the high old age dependency ratio as well. Do we have any questions so far before we move on to the labor force and industry profile? Okay. So this kind of connects the Maryland profile back to the economic impact analysis when we're talking about employment concentration, industry distribution, and all of that stuff. So particularly during the pandemic, some of these numbers don't look like they always did. And for that reason, we went with more time series tables just to show how each of the rural regions might have adapted to or been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time of this report, though, a lot of 2021 numbers weren't out. So most of it is 2020 or 2019, depending on the type of data that it is, especially since county data is sometimes trickier to procure than state data. So as you can see here, this is the annual unemployment rate by region. Across the board, unemployment increased from 2015 to 2020. In the state as a whole, it was about 5% in 2015, and in 2020, it was about 6.8%. You never want zero unemployment, so some unemployment is good. We call that structural unemployment. People finding better jobs, people focusing on professional development, people going to school. So around 4% is what we say is a good unemployment rate. So yeah, you can see about 8.7 in 2020 in the lower shore. But you can also see that historically lower shore has had a much higher unemployment rate than the other regions and then Maryland as a whole. And the urban region has had slightly lower / on par with Maryland as a whole, although it did jump drastically from 2019 to 2020, particularly compared to the other regions. So going hand in hand with the unemployment rate is the labor force participation rate. Kind of provides a different story, a different side of what's going on in the economy and the labor force. So it's definitely become a key metric, particularly during the pandemic, because while we did see a lot of people become unemployed, lose their jobs, we also saw a lot of people stop looking for work and leave the labor force. Commonly called the Great Resignation, as we're calling it. But so as you can see, in 2015, Maryland, we had a labor force participation rate of about 68.4%, and that declined to about 67.7% in 2019. Obviously, this would be much more interesting if we had the 2020 numbers. And that would be something that maybe we'll have to add to this later on, because it definitely, I'm going to guess, went way down. Even though it doesn't look like a lot, though, that 1% is a good amount. But you can see that historically, there's a lot lower labor force participation rate in the Western region. So that means that a lot of people could work and are choosing to not seek employment in the Western region. And it is always pretty much higher in the urban region. There are more people who are able to work and are working. So moving on, we have employment wage statistics. So this is probably the most recent data that we were able to get. It's the first quarter of 2021. All of the wages are weighted based on the number of employees in each region, just to account for population differences. So you can see that the average annual wage in Maryland is about $70,000, or was about $70,000. And it really does change drastically from region to region. It's much higher in the urban region at 76,000 and much lower in the rural regions, with the lowest being Lower Shore at 44,000. So a lot of this has to do with cost of living, and it also has to do with the industries and the professions that are available in each of these different regions. And so to tie into that, we have this graph that looks at average annual employment by industry and region. So hopefully this isn't too confusing. Each of the regions is sums by itself. So you would interpret this by saying 0.5% of Maryland's workforce works in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting and mining. So you're not summing this way, we're summing vertically. So I've gone ahead and highlighted some of the interesting deviations from the Maryland average workforce distribution. So you can see it's 0.5% in Maryland for agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, and mining, but 3% in Middle Shore. Even though it's a small percentage, it's still a very large difference compared to the average in the state. The Southern Shore, you see a higher concentration in construction. Upper Shore, a higher concentration in manufacturing. Retail trade is interestingly higher in almost all of the rural regions compared to the state as a whole. Transportation, warehousing, and utilities, pretty big jump from the average in Western Maryland. And you can see the Lower Shore also has lower percentages, or has a lower percentage in professional, scientific, and management and administrative and waste management services, which is a really big industry in Maryland. But the biggest industry in Maryland is educational services and healthcare and social assistance, making up about 23.7% of jobs in Maryland. And yeah, and the Southern Shore has a pretty high percentage in public administration. So that is about it. But here I do talk about, a few industries were notably more prevalent in the rural regions, including construction, manufacturing, transportation, warehouse, and utilities. A lot of them blue collar jobs. And then 2 industries are notably more prevalent in the urban region. And those are the 2 that are most prevalent in Maryland as a whole. So that concludes the rural Maryland profile and the economic impact analysis. I know that you all have been given a copy of this, so if you have a hankering for more numbers, you can scroll down to the appendix, and it has all of the detailed results. You can see the data from any dimension you like. And yeah, if you're interested in that, feel free to dig around. Are there any ending questions? Or comments?
Well, thank you, Allie, for this great presentation. I think, some of this is like you still have to digest, like, okay, you get the numbers and you still have to kind of formulate them. And I thought that the profile was interesting and its reflection of the differences between, the industries found in rural Maryland versus those in the urban core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found it very interesting researching all of this for you all.
Yeah. Well, any final last questions for Allie while we've got her? If not, thank you so much, Allie, for this presentation. One of the questions we wanted to ask this group were, what are our future needs in terms of economic analysis, do you want to dig further in? Wanted to make note, this analysis only covers 4 years between 2018 to 2021. We've since, we're going into fiscal year 23 and we have 22 data available. So I'm interested in the group's thoughts on one, how frequently to run this type of analysis, and then two, do you think we need a more in-depth economic analysis beyond just the implant, which is a software program that kind of plug in numbers and it spits it out? So we're curious of people's thoughts on future needs.
I doubt that we need to do something like this on an annual basis. There's going to be some validity of these data over a period of time, even if you're not capturing, for example, this year or next year, and wait until, clearly we've seen some major disruptions in the economy with the pandemic, and probably 2021 is an outlier in every respect. As we get back to the post-pandemic economy, we're certainly going to want to be measuring this stuff again. My gut says that you probably don't want to let much more than about 5 years slide by, but I'll throw that out just as a starting point.
That's great. Yeah, I was thinking 3 years, 5 years, like what is the ideal time frame? Because we all want to make sure that the program's doing what it's supposed to do and that we're seeing impact as a relation to our grants.
I would like to just throw something out there. This is more of a subset, but I'd love to see if it could be charted, especially through the RMPIF and MAERDAF grants, or even Commerce might have some of this data. What are the trends in projects for economic development? Are they more what's getting the impact? Is it education? Is it healthcare? Is it the biggest industries? Is it, technology or new technology? Is it support for entrepreneurs? But I would love to see a graph of what is the trending acceleration for what people in the communities are reaching towards. What nonprofits are really making it. Basically, we're all out there trying to help, but it would be great to know where the iron is hot. We kind of know, we sort of have an idea, but data is so powerful. And if there was a way to chart that, I think we could target need much more effectively.
This is Rosanna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I can remember what I was going to say.
Thank you, Roseanne. One thing I wanted to toss out as well was I'm interested in wanting to know more about the economic impact that has happened as a result of the supply chain disruption, specifically with agriculture in the state of Maryland, as it pertains to farmers being able to get their product to market within Maryland, and understanding what are the disruptions so that we can better address them.
This is Rosanna. My 2 cents is for the next 5 years, because that way the 2021, 2022 will be we'll know, right? But I also wanted to ask if Allie had any idea on the $45 million outlier. It was in there, but I wanted to know how to account for it. Was the RMC grant did it have a direct relationship to receiving the $45 million? Do you have any recommendations for how to look at that outlier?
So that outlier was a matching fund that was secured by the organization, the awardee organization. So we do include those matching funds in the direct impact because it is technically there as a result of the grant that RMC awarded to that organization. How to look at it, it's not something that RMC awarded to them. RMC did not give them $45 million. But it did come as a result of it. And so it is new money in that economy that has resulted from this. So I guess that's how I would look at it. Does that help?
Well, I do know that the RMC grant funding is extremely important to the matching. But that one is so like amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems like I did do some research on it because I was interested in it. It seems like it's a very big project for the town of Easton. So I'm guessing that they already had plans in the books and they had some maybe funding promised from the state or the county, and then RMC awarded additional grant money, and then that money that was there was then awarded as matched funds. So yeah, it seems like a very big project for them.
Yeah, speaking to answer that question, I think speaking as a former town council member, did that project did that funding put the project over the top and make it finally happen? Yes, of course, it was on the books for years. Yes, but was this funding critical in moving that forward? No question, absolutely, it was.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, last question.
The question asked earlier, I don't think was really answered about, and I really appreciate that one about people getting farmers getting their food and their products to market. I think one of the powers of this survey and study is the ability to maybe do predictive analysis and do some prospective predictions for the future. And yes, we could wait for the 2021 data, but the problem is that we're being hit with some things now that were not predicted, not projected. In 2020, we were hit with, for dairy, for example, in Carroll County, farmers having to dump a lot of their milk and prices tanking. And now conversely, we're dealing with skyrocketing inflation and supply chain issues and gas in particular going up, which is impacting all ag commodities as well as the consumer. So I think not that the answer needs to be given today, and it's a pretty complex answer to a great question, but maybe there can be some predictive analyses in the model and enhancing it to integrate some of these things, including, the great intentions of these grants, the impact of inflation on them in future dollars and how that might need to be adjusted accordingly. Over.
Okay. I think that's it. Yeah, that's a great point. In predictive analysis, especially in a time like we live in now, it's very, very complex. Supply chain management issues are issues for many, many reasons. COVID, different policies that are restricting access for workers, and also the war in Ukraine is having a huge impact on supply chain management issues. And definitely a lot of it, I think, does disproportionately impact people living in rural communities, people who rely on agriculture.
One thing I would say, and again, it's not to put you on the spot for any answer, I think there's opportunity for that, but it's not just things with Ukraine, but as we saw what means we could do with Governor Hogan dropping the gas taxes for a bit and how that helped folks. And we can also see from the model that sometimes at the legislature level, we're kind of penny wise and pound foolish. We raise this and that tax, but if we're driving people out of the state, whether it's businesses or active duty military or retirees or families, when we have such oppressive taxes trying to keep piling it on, we're actually driving people out and being penny wise and pound foolish and losing that tax base when we could. What you showed is that those investments on behalf of the farmers and their farms actually does have a return and multiplier effects positively on the economy, which I enjoyed seeing that. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody's time today. Want to be respectful. So we were running until 2 o'clock. We'll continue this conversation. If you guys have questions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to myself or any member of the RMC staff. But we definitely appreciate your time today. And with that, bid everybody a good day, and please keep in touch. Our next event will be June 1st, virtual, with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond CEO, Baltimore branch, Mr. Tom Barkin, to talk more about current economic impacts and impacts to capital and access to capital and lending. So thanks again, everybody. In the meantime, please feel free to reach out. May 20th, letters of intent are due to apply for the Maryland Agricultural Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund and the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. You can access it on our website at rural.maryland.gov. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.